The call came at 10:40 p.m. on a rainy Friday night. From a payphone in the lobby, Regina spoke to her daughter. "We arrived safely," she said. "We'll call you in the morning." Those were the last words anyone would ever hear from the couple from Goiânia. 7 years later, in a forgotten room of a water park, something began to seep from the cracks of a metal locker. A crimson trail that no one had noticed until then. What the maintenance crew discovered that November in 2006 would reveal the most improbable fate a family could ever imagine. Regina Assis had woken up that Friday in September to the familiar sound of rain drumming against the zinc roof of their home in Jardim America. It was 6:30 in the morning in Goiânia, and she was already mentally calculating if the weather would permit the trip she and Mauro had been planning for months. Beside her, he was still asleep, one arm stretched over his pillow, his dark, slightly curly hair stuck to his forehead from the humid pre-dawn heat. At 44, Regina moved with the timed precision of someone who had managed a fabric store on Avenida 85 since she was 25. She had ash blonde hair, always styled to shoulder length, and small hoop earrings she never took off, not even to sleep. She had a habit of choosing blouses she called elegant without being loud, almost always black with small golden dots, like the one she had already set aside for the trip. Mauro, 2 years her senior, worked in sound and lighting for events. He always carried a small notebook in his back pocket and had a particular way of facing problems with a quiet good humor, as if life were an inside joke only he truly understood. The children were still asleep. Larissa, 22, was studying pedagogy at PUC and had inherited her mother's silent stubbornness for solving things on her own. Icaro, 19, was an apprentice electrician who spent his afternoons helping Mauro with equipment when he wasn't at his internship. In the room they had shared since they were little, the two siblings had built an intimacy of accomplices. They knew when their parents needed time alone, when the bills were tight at the end of the month, and when Regina was especially tired after a difficult day at the store. The idea for the trip had surfaced one Sunday afternoon in June. Their debts were finally under control. Mauro had completed a large job for an event hall, and Regina had managed to get a rare weekend off, their first in over 2 years. Caldas Novas was just over a 2-hour drive from Goiânia, and they chose a resort with a water park and a view of Lake Corumba. Regina longed for the warm waters of the thermal pools. Mauro planned to bring a compact analog camera, a simple Kodak a client had given him, already loaded with gold 200 film. He wanted, as he put it, to catch the lights of the water slides at night. In the kitchen, while she made coffee and Mauro packed a few things into a travel bag, Regina found the keychain their children had given him for his birthday. It was a small golden metal piqui, a fruit typical of the Goiano Cerrado, small enough to fit in the palm of her hand. Mauro always kept it on the keyring for the car, a 1996 silver Monza, which he maintained in impeccable condition despite the countless miles logged between Goiânia and the interior towns where he worked. He woke around 9, finding Regina finishing up the small suitcase they were taking. 2 changes of clothes, toiletries, the camera wrapped in a dish towel to protect it from moisture, and the notebook Mauro never left behind. He had a habit of scribbling ideas, schedules, and small reminders across its pages in a tiny script that only he could fully decipher. The rain had stopped by 10, leaving behind that characteristic smell of wet earth, mixed with the sweet aroma of the ipe flowers that decorated the neighborhood sidewalks. Icaro helped his father check the car's oil and tire pressure. Larissa applied a light lipstick to her mother's lips, telling her she looked drop-dead gorgeous in the black blouse with the golden dots she'd chosen for the trip. The 2 children stood at the doorway, waving as the silver Monza disappeared around the curve of the street, leading Regina and Mauro toward what was supposed to be nothing more than a quiet weekend away from the grueling routine of Goiânia. On the road, the couple talked of simple plans: a leisurely lunch at the resort, a dip in the thermal pools, and maybe a walk along the lake's edge before dinner. Regina had brought a book of essays she wanted to finish. Mauro planned to test his camera with a few shots of the water park's facilities. Neither of them could have imagined that in just a few hours, they would face a situation that would transform a romantic getaway into the beginning of one of the most disturbing mysteries Caldas Novas had ever known. The resort they chose was situated on an elevated area of Caldas Novas, offering a panoramic view of Lake Corumba. It was a mix of traditional lodging and a sprawling water park that stayed open until 10:30 p.m. Regina and Mauro arrived around 3 in the afternoon that Friday, September 17, 1999, after a smooth drive. They stopped only once at a roadside cafe for coffee and a cheese roll that Mauro insisted on sharing with his wife. Check-in was swift. A young employee, no older than 20, stamped their forms and handed them 2 key cards for a room on the second floor of the main building. The room was simple but comfortable, with 2 single beds that could be pushed together, a well-functioning air conditioner, and a small balcony with a partial view of the thermal pools. Regina opened the curtains and remarked that from there they could watch the families in the warm water, children running between adults as steam rose in a light mist into the afternoon air. After dropping off their bags and changing, Regina put on a modest swimsuit under a light dress. Mauro wore shorts and a polo shirt. They went down to explore. The aquatic complex was impressive, with thermal pools of varying temperatures and colorful water slides that snaked between palm trees and manicured gardens. There was a wave pool that operated on a schedule and several rest areas with lounge chairs and umbrellas. Regina was the first to slip into one of the thermal pools, closing her eyes and smiling as the warm water enveloped a body weary from months of intense work at the fabric store. Mauro stood at the edge for a few minutes, testing the analog camera, adjusting the focus for a few experimental shots. The afternoon light created interesting reflections on the water's surface, and he took a few pictures of Regina relaxing, steam swirling around her face, her blonde hair clinging to her neck from the humidity. They spent the rest of the afternoon moving between different pools, sipping tropical juices at the swim-up bar and watching other families enjoy their weekend. Around 7, they went up to their room, showered, and got ready for dinner. Regina chose a white blouse and a dark skirt. Mauro put on jeans and a light blue button-down shirt that Regina always said matched his eyes. The resort's restaurant served a varied buffet featuring typical Goiano dishes. They served themselves without rushing, chose a table near a window overlooking the lake, and talked about the future while they ate. Regina mentioned the possibility of renovating the kitchen the following year. Mauro spoke of a large sound project in Goiânia that could bring in significant extra income. It was the easy conversation of a couple who had known each other for a long time, punctuated by knowing smiles and references only the two of them understood. After dinner, they decided to take a walk through the water park's nocturnal landscape. The colored lights on the water slides created a stunning visual spectacle against the dark sky. Near the wave pool, a guitarist and a woman with a soft voice were performing Brazilian folk music. A few people danced barefoot in the wet area, while others simply chatted in small groups, enjoying the pleasant night air. It was during this walk that they noticed the first signs of the storm, heavy clouds gathering on the horizon. An employee passed by, announcing that the park would be closing at 10:30 p.m. because of rain on the meteorological radar. Regina and Mauro decided to use their last few minutes to take some night photos near the slides, where the blue and green lights created effects Mauro found postcard-worthy. At 10:40 p.m., just as the first drops of rain began to fall, Regina used the payphone in the lobby to call Larissa. The call lasted less than a minute, just long enough to say they had arrived safely and would call again in the morning. On the other end of the line, Larissa said she and Icaro were watching television and told them to enjoy their weekend. Those were the last words the family would ever hear in Regina's voice. From there, the couple headed back toward the water slides for the photos Mauro was so eager to take. The park was now practically deserted, with only a few employees conducting the nightly cleanup and checking equipment. The rain was slowly growing heavier, creating a soft patter against the palm leaves and the surface of the pools. At night, the waterslide area had a completely different atmosphere. The colored lights, blue, green, and yellow, cast dancing reflections on the still water of the landing pools, while the curved tubes rose like giant sculptures against the cloud-laden sky. Mauro adjusted the focus on his analog camera, trying to capture the effect of the artificial lights mixed with the last remnants of twilight. Regina walked slowly beside her husband, observing construction details that went unnoticed during the day amidst the bustle of families. Now, in the silence, punctuated only by the distant sound of music from the wave pool and the growing rhythm of the rain, she could appreciate the engineering behind it all. The water pumps, the filtration systems, the pipes running beneath decorative walkways. It was a world of machinery hidden behind the fun. Mauro took a few experimental shots, manually adjusting the aperture to compensate for the low light. The Kodak Gold 200 film in the camera wasn't ideal for night photography, but he wanted to at least try to capture something of the unique scene between shots. He wiped the lens with a small cloth he always carried in his pocket, protecting the equipment from the intensifying moisture. It was then they realized they were a bit lost on their way back to the hotel. The waterslide area was larger than it had seemed during the day, with numerous walkways and stairs connecting different levels. In the dark, with the night lighting creating confusing shadows, Regina and Mauro hesitated, unsure which path led back to their room. Just then, a security guard appeared, making his final rounds of the night. He was a man of about 50 in uniform, carrying a small flashlight and a radio. When Regina asked for the quickest way back to the hotel, he pointed in a direction different from what they had initially thought. "It's closer this way," he said, gesturing toward an area that looked more industrial, with less decoration and more exposed equipment. "Just go behind the pumps and up the service stairs. Everyone uses it." The advice seemed to make sense. The guard was finishing his shift and likely knew all the resort's shortcuts. Regina and Mauro thanked him and headed in the direction he had indicated, passing through an area where the noise of the water pumps grew louder. This was the operational heart of the water park, a labyrinth of pipes, motors, and equipment that kept the entire structure running 24 hours a day. The rain had become significantly heavier by the time they reached a metal door with a clear sign in Portuguese. "Technical area. Entry prohibited." Mauro hesitated for a moment, but Regina reminded him that the guard had specifically said to go behind the pumps, and they could hear the motors humming from just beyond the door. Besides, the employee had said that everyone used that path. They pushed the metal door, which swung open easily. On the other side, they found a poorly lit corridor. Pipes ran along the ceiling, and the concrete walls, once painted white, were now yellowed by time and constant humidity. The floor was smooth cement, slightly damp from condensation. The noise of the pumps intensified, creating a continuous drone that drowned out all other sounds. They walked down the corridor, assuming there must be a staircase or an exit that would lead them back to the resort's public areas. The only light came from a few old fluorescent bulbs that cast a cold, white glow, a stark contrast to the welcoming atmosphere of the guest areas. Regina began to feel a slight unease, not exactly fear, but the sense of being out of place, like wandering into the staff-only section of a hospital or an airport. Mauro, on the other hand, was more curious than concerned. He had always liked to understand how things worked. This behind-the-scenes glimpse of a water park was almost educational for him. He snapped a few photos of the corridor and the equipment, thinking it would be interesting to show Icaro, who was just starting to work with electricity and would surely be fascinated by electrical and hydraulic systems of this scale. It was only when they tried to turn back that they discovered the first problem. The metal door through which they had entered would no longer open from the inside. The handle turned, but the door remained stubbornly shut, either locked or jammed. Mauro slammed his shoulder against it once, then again. He tried jiggling the frame, hoping to dislodge whatever mechanism held it fast, but nothing gave. Regina added her weight to the effort, pushing with all her might to no avail. Outside, the wind howled, now a companion to the driving rain. They could hear gusts striking the building, making its metal skeleton vibrate with a low hum. Perhaps it was the atmospheric pressure itself, some automatic weather lock they didn't know about. Whatever the cause, their only option was to press on, to follow the security guard's original advice and find the service staircase. The corridor stretched on for another dozen yards before making a sharp right turn, where the gloom deepened. Mauro and Regina moved slowly, the small light from his camera cutting a weak path through the darkness as the fluorescent lamps became fewer and farther between. The constant thrum of the pumps was their unchanging soundtrack, now layered with new sounds. The drip of condensation from overhead pipes, the electric buzz of unseen machinery, and the muffled echo of their own footsteps on the concrete floor. And then, just past the turn, they found it. The service stairs the guard had mentioned, a simple metal structure with a painted iron handrail and non-slip treads. Mauro went first, testing the firmness of each step, while Regina followed close behind, her hand trailing along the rail slick with condensation. The stairs led to a small landing from which another flight should have ascended to the hotel level. But at the top of the first flight, they discovered their second problem, one far greater than the first. Their path was blocked by a newly installed sheet of plywood screwed firmly into the frame. A temporary sign was tacked to it. Renovation. Access blocked. The obstruction was clearly recent, put up that day or the day before as part of some maintenance project. Regina sank onto a step and sighed, a cold knot of genuine worry tightening in her stomach. They were trapped. They couldn't go back the way they came, and they couldn't go forward. Mauro gave the panel a futile shove, but it was solid, fixed with screws they had no way of removing. Outside, the rain had grown into a full-blown storm, the sound of it drumming against metal surfaces, the wind rattling unseen objects. This was no weather to be caught in, even if they could find a way out. The only sensible thing to do was wait. They descended back into the corridor and began exploring again, testing the handles of side doors. Most were locked, likely leading to equipment closets or electrical rooms. But one door gave way. It opened into a small chamber that seemed to be a storage space for pool maintenance chemicals. Empty metal shelves lined one wall, and a few clean plastic drums stood in a corner. Against the back wall was a large two-door metal locker. The air held a faint, not unpleasant chemical tang, a ghost of chlorine and cleaning supplies. Regina noted the vents high and low on the walls, a system designed to keep the air circulating. The air was hot and thick with humidity, typical of a utility space housing heat-generating equipment. Mauro took off his glasses, which had fogged over, and set them on the floor by the locker. As he used his t-shirt to wipe the sweat from his face, an idea sparked: the metal locker. Perhaps it offered an alternative path, a ventilation duct, a service passage hidden behind it. They opened the locker doors and peered inside. It was a spacious, industrial-style unit, empty save for a single shelf at the top. There was no hidden passage, but Regina noticed that if they removed the shelf, they might be able to see through the ventilation slits in the doors to scout what lay beyond. Mauro helped her lift the lightweight shelf from its brackets. It was now well past midnight. The storm outside raged at its peak, the wind making the building groan, its cry mingling with the hum of the pumps and the relentless drumming of the rain. Regina had slumped to the floor, leaning against a wall, while Mauro, restless, made one more pass at the locker. He tried to pull the doors together to widen the gap between them and the frame, to get a better angle through the upper vents. Regina stood to help, holding one door steady while he worked the other. Their hands were slick with sweat, their movements clumsy with fatigue. As they pulled, trying to synchronize their effort, a single stray thread from Mauro's yellow sweater, left folded on a nearby shelf, caught in the seam between the two metal doors. What happened next was a blur. The old hinges, worn by time and dampness, gave way to the tension. With the recoil, the doors slammed shut, their own weight pulling them closed with a deafening clang. Mauro, standing closest, was knocked off balance. The sudden motion sent him stumbling backward into the locker's dark interior. He landed sitting, dazed but unhurt. The problem came a moment later. The internal latch, old and misaligned, had jammed. It was a primitive industrial mechanism designed to lock securely, not to be opened with ease. From the outside, a simple handle and a loop for a padlock. From the inside, nothing. Regina lunged for the handle, pulling with all her strength. She banged on the doors, the sound a flat, hopeless thud. "Mauro, are you okay?" His voice came back, muffled. "I'm fine, just stuck." Regina frantically searched for anything to pry the lock open. Mauro pushed from the inside, his shoulder thudding against the metal. But the space was too tight, his position too awkward. The metallic scrapes and groans of their efforts echoed in the small room. The situation had shifted in a terrifying instant from inconvenient to critical. They spoke through the vents, their voices strained as they tried to remain calm. He assured her he had enough space, that the ventilation was adequate, that the claustrophobia hadn't set in. Yet, Regina's desperate search yielded a small screwdriver from a forgotten toolbox in the corner. She wedged it into the seam, trying to jimmy the latch. She could hear it scrape, feel it give, just a fraction, a sliver of hope, before it clicked back into its locked position. Fatigue began to set in, a heavy, leaden thing. Regina's arms ached from the repetitive strain. Inside, Mauro reported that the heat was building, the enclosed space trapping his body heat. By 2 in the morning, they stopped to rest. The hours that followed were a torturous cycle of hope and despair. Regina couldn't leave his side, her ear pressed to the vents, listening to the sound of his breathing. His voice, though muffled, was her only anchor. By 3, the heat inside the locker had become a genuine threat. Mauro told her he was drenched in sweat. He was trying to control his breathing, to stay calm. Regina found a piece of cardboard and tried to fashion a crude funnel, directing air from the room's vent toward the locker, a desperate, likely futile gesture. Again and again she returned to the lock with the screwdriver. Her hands were raw, her fingers cramping. Inside, Mauro tried to help, pushing when she told him to, a coordinated effort made clumsy by exhaustion. By 4, Regina made one last, desperate attempt. She ran into the main corridor, screaming for help, banging a pipe against the wall until her arm went numb. The only answer was the echo of her own voice, swallowed by the drone of the pumps. When she returned, Mauro was quieter. He was conserving energy, he said, but his words were slower. He was feeling the first signs of dehydration, a dry mouth, a faint dizziness. Regina's desperation sharpened into a razor-edged focus. She picked up the screwdriver. During the brief moments she had to rest her aching hands, they talked. Not about their predicament, but about small, normal things. Plans for the weekend, a movie they wanted to see with the kids, a fence that needed painting. They were small anchors to a world outside this hot, humming room, a way to keep the encroaching panic at bay. Around 5 in the morning, Mauro's condition inside the cabinet took a sharp, visible turn for the worse. His voice grew fainter and he began to struggle to maintain lucidity. The combination of extreme heat, dehydration, and lack of sleep was taking its brutal toll. Regina realized time was running out. She needed a more drastic solution for the jammed lock. It was then that she decided to force the doors with more aggressive leverage. In a more complete toolbox she found behind some plastic drums, she located an iron bar and tried to wedge it between the two cabinet doors. The metal began to deform slightly under the pressure, leaving visible marks in the paint, but the lock held firm. Her attempts with the iron bar produced loud metallic screeches that echoed through the technical area. After each attempt, Regina would wait for a few moments, hoping someone might have heard and would come to investigate, but there was no response. The resort seemed completely isolated, and the morning maintenance routines had not yet begun. From 5:30 onward, Mauro became less responsive. Regina kept talking to him through the doors, but his replies came slower and with less clarity. She could hear his heavy breathing and knew the situation was becoming critical. Her determination drove her to work with the iron bar until her strength was completely gone, trying every possible angle to break the lock. Around 6, as the first light of dawn began to filter through the small room's ventilation grates, Regina finally succumbed to physical and emotional exhaustion. She had spent more than 6 hours trying to free Mauro, and her body could no longer obey the commands of her mind. She sank to the floor near the cabinet, still speaking to him in intervals, feeling her own strength rapidly fading. The heat, the dehydration, the stress, and the continuous physical effort had consumed all her energy. Regina rested her head against the cool wall, the iron bar still clutched in one hand, and felt her consciousness begin to drift. The last words she managed to direct to Mauro were a whispered apology, a promise that someone would find them, and a declaration of love that he may or may not have heard through the metal doors of the cabinet where he remained trapped. Saturday dawned bright and new with a clear sky and a pleasant temperature, as if the previous night's storm had been nothing but a passing nightmare. At the resort, the first guests made their way down to breakfast around 7, remarking on the storm that had shaken the region during the night. Families with children were already planning to enjoy the pools as soon as they opened, and the normal rhythm of a leisure-filled Saturday was beginning to take shape. It was the second-floor chambermaid, Donna Celia, a 52-year-old woman who had worked at the resort for over a decade, who first noticed something was amiss with Regina and Mauro's room. When she knocked on the door at 8:30 for the routine cleaning, there was no answer. Using her master key, she let herself in and found the room exactly as the guests had left it the day before. Their suitcases were packed, toiletries were organized in the bathroom, and clothes were folded on an armchair. The beds had not been slept in. They were impeccably made, the covers smooth and the pillows in the exact position the resort staff had left them. On the balcony, the curtains remained open in the same position, and there was no sign that the guests had spent any time in the room during the night. Donna Celia checked the bathroom. The towels were dry and folded, the toiletries untouched. The maid went down to the reception and reported the situation to the manager on duty, Senor Antonio Carlos, an experienced man who had handled many unusual situations during his 15 years in the hotel industry. He went up to the room to verify her report and confirmed Donna Celia's observations. There were no signs of violence. forced entry, or any other irregularity. It simply seemed as if the guests had never returned to their room the previous night. His first step was to check if the couple's silver Monza was still in the parking lot. The car was easily located, parked in the same spot since Friday afternoon. Locked and with no signs of tampering. Through the windows, they could see a few personal items on the passenger seat: a road map, a half-empty bottle of water, and a bag with a few items purchased on their trip. By 10 in the morning, with the disappearance confirmed, the manager activated the resort's security protocol. First, they tried to contact Regina and Mauro using the information on their registration card, but the home phone in Goiânia rang unanswered. Their children, Larissa and Icaro, had left early for a family commitment and would not return until the afternoon. Next, they began an informal search of the premises, asking staff and guests if anyone had seen the couple. The first piece of information came from the musician who had been playing near the wave pool the night before. He vaguely remembered a couple walking towards the water slides during his performance, around 10:30. The description, a blonde woman in a light-colored blouse and a man with glasses carrying a camera, matched Regina and Mauro. It was the last time anyone admitted to seeing them. At noon, with the situation growing more concerning, the resort officially contacted the civil police of Caldas Novas and the fire department. The first team to arrive was composed of investigator João Medeiros, a policeman with 20 years of experience in missing persons cases, and 2 firefighters specializing in water rescue. They began standard procedures for disappearances in a leisure environment. The search started in the aquatic areas. The firefighters inspected all the pools, including the deeper thermal ones, using diving equipment to check the bottoms and drainage systems. They forced open every drain and suction inlet, looking for any sign that someone could have drowned or become trapped. The pools were temporarily emptied for a complete inspection. Simultaneously, the police team scoured all the resort's social areas, restaurants, bars, game rooms, and the hallways of the accommodation blocks. They interviewed staff and guests, gathering information about the couple's last movements. The night guard who had advised Regina and Mauro about the shortcut was located at his home, awakened from his daytime sleep, and gave a detailed statement about his interaction with them. The information about the shortcut through the technical area led the search team to the service corridors. They navigated the entire system of passages connecting different parts of the resort, checking machine rooms, storage areas, and maintenance depots. The problem was that the search took place during the normal operating hours of the equipment. Pumps were running at full power, the noise was deafening, and chemicals for pool maintenance were constantly being sprayed. The small room where Regina and Mauro were was inspected superficially. The team entered, took a general look around, noted the empty drums and shelves, but did not move the heavy cabinet that was pushed against the back wall. The building map the firefighters were using did not even show that particular room. It had been officially decommissioned a few months earlier when a renovation reorganized the chemical storage system. Saturday afternoon brought reinforcements. A second team from the fire department arrived from Annapolis with more specialized equipment, including motion detectors and thermal cameras that could identify human presence in enclosed spaces. The civil police mobilized more investigators, and volunteers from Caldas Novas joined the search along the shores of Carumba Lake, where it was possible the couple had gone for a night walk. Investigator João Medeiros coordinated a systematic search that extended throughout the entire resort property. Teams combed through every garden, every service area, every corner where 2 people might be hidden or trapped. K9 units were brought in and followed the trails leading to the lake, but they found no consistent scent that could indicate the direction Regina and Mauro had taken. The search in the waters of Carumba Lake was intensified during the afternoon. Professional divers explored the areas near the resort, checking for the possibility of an accidental drowning. The hypothesis was that the couple might have decided to walk along the lake's edge during the storm and had trouble returning. However, the water was clear from the previous night's rain and underwater visibility was good. No bodies were found. Parallel to the physical searches, the investigation focused on reconstructing Regina and Mauro's last known movements. The guard who had directed them to the shortcut was interviewed again, this time at the police station, providing precise details about the time and direction the couple had taken. His story remained consistent. He had pointed them to the path through the technical corridors because it was a genuine shortcut used by employees and occasionally by guests. During this interview, the guard mentioned a detail that had initially gone unnoticed. On Saturday morning, when he arrived for his day shift, he had noticed that the metal access door to the technical area was jammed in an unusual way. Normally, it would close but not lock completely, allowing staff to enter as needed. That morning, however, it seemed stuck, as if something was preventing the mechanism from working properly. This information led to a second inspection of the technical area, this time much more detailed. The fire department team returned to the corridors, tested all the doors, and checked every accessible room. They confirmed that the main door was indeed malfunctioning. The internal handle did not respond correctly, creating a situation where someone could enter but would have difficulty getting out. The discovery of the faulty door shifted the focus of the search. If Regina and Mauro had indeed entered the technical area and become trapped, they could be anywhere within that labyrinth of corridors and rooms. The team began a centimeter-by-centimeter search, opening every door, moving equipment, and checking spaces that had initially seemed inaccessible. It was during this more meticulous search that the firefighters found the first real evidence of the couple's presence. In the small room that had been superficially inspected that morning, a more powerful flashlight revealed something that had been missed in the first pass. Near the cabinet against the wall, a pair of thin-rimmed glasses lay on the floor, exactly like the ones Mauro wore according to the description provided by his children. The discovery of the glasses electrified the search team. It was the first concrete physical evidence that Regina and Mauro had been in that specific location. The glasses were photographed in place before being collected as evidence, and the small room was sealed off for a detailed forensic inspection. Every inch of the space was examined for other clues that could explain what had happened to the couple. However, despite the discovery, no other sign of Regina and Mauro was found in the room. There were no clear footprints on the concrete floor. There were no signs of a struggle or violence, and there was no indication of how they might have left. The cabinet against the wall was examined externally, but as it was visibly closed and showed no signs of being tampered with, it was not considered a likely place to search for missing people. The end of Saturday afternoon arrived with no significant progress beyond the discovery of the glasses. The search teams had covered practically the entire resort and its surrounding areas without finding any other trace of the couple. The most accepted hypothesis among investigators was that Regina and Mauro had managed to get out of the technical area by some means not yet identified and might be lost in the vicinity or have had an accident on a local road. On Sunday morning, the search was expanded to a wider radius around the resort. Teams scoured rural roads, neighboring farms, and wooded areas near Kurumba Lake. A military police helicopter flew over the region. The case began to gain traction in the local press. The possibility of kidnapping or a crime started to be considered, although there was no evidence to support such theories. The news of the disappearance reached Goiânia on Sunday afternoon, when Larissa and Icaro returned home and found several messages on their answering machine. The first was from the resort itself, informing them of the situation and asking the family to get in touch urgently. The following messages were from local journalists who had begun covering the case, and one was from the civil police requesting that the family come to Caldas Novas to give statements and assist with the investigation. The impact of the news on the two young people was devastating. Larissa, always the more emotionally controlled, immediately took on the role of family coordinator, calling relatives and friends to inform them of the situation. Icaro, more impulsive, wanted to leave for Caldas Novas immediately, but his sister convinced him to wait until Monday morning, when they could travel more safely and with clearer minds. On Monday, September 20th, the siblings arrived in Caldas Novas in a car borrowed from an uncle. They were received at the police station by investigator João Medeiros, who brought them up to date on all the developments. The discovery of Mauro's glasses was a shock. It confirmed that their parents had indeed been in the technical area, but it did nothing to clarify what had happened to them afterward. Larissa and Icaro were then taken to see the location where the glasses had been found. The small room, with the locker pressed against the wall, seemed harmless in the daylight, yet an unsettling atmosphere clung to the place. Icaro noticed it at once. The glasses were not in a spot where his father would have left them temporarily. They were set near a wall, out of the way, but in a place where they wouldn't easily be lost. The children had provided detailed information about Regina and Mauro's habits, their routines, anything that might aid the investigation. They confirmed that the Peiki keychain noted on the resort's registration form was indeed something their father always carried. It had been a gift from them on his last birthday. The fact that the keychain was neither in the hotel room nor found with the glasses was yet another mystery. The local press began to feature the case prominently. The newspaper Diario de Caldas ran a front-page story with photos of Regina and Mauro under the headline, "Couple from Goiânia mysteriously disappears at resort." The article detailed the intensive searches, the discovery of the glasses, and the various theories being investigated, from accidental drowning to the possibility of kidnapping. Theories about their disappearance multiplied rapidly. Some speculated the couple had fled voluntarily, leaving their old life behind. Others suggested abduction, though there had been no ransom demand or signs of violence. The hypothesis of an accident in the lake's waters remained open, despite extensive searches yielding no bodies. The possibility that they had become lost in the surrounding forest was also considered. Over the following week, the searches continued with reduced intensity. Local volunteers scoured more distant areas, and the civil police expanded their investigation to other towns in the region, checking if Regina and Mauro might have left Caldas Novas on their own or with assistance. Bus stations and gas stations received photos of the couple, and bus drivers were interviewed. The resort cooperated fully, providing records of all employees, work schedules, and detailed reports on its security systems. The administration also hired a private security firm to review all protocols and identify any potential failures that could have contributed to the disappearance. An intriguing aspect of the case was the complete absence of any trace beyond the glasses. In missing persons investigations, there is usually a trail of evidence: footprints, personal items, witness accounts of suspicious movements. In the case of Regina and Mauro, it was as if they had simply evaporated after leaving the glasses in the small technical room. By the second week of October, the active searches began to wind down. The civil police kept the case open, pursuing occasional leads, but resources were gradually redirected to more recent cases. The resort returned to normal operations, albeit with significant changes to its security systems and guest orientation protocols. Larissa and Icaro returned to Goiânia, but came back to Caldas Novas periodically to follow up on the investigation and keep hope alive. They organized awareness campaigns, distributed posters at bus stations and gas stations, and maintained constant contact with the local press to ensure the case was not forgotten. Mauro's silver Monza remained in the resort's parking lot for nearly a month before the family decided to take it back to Goiânia. When Icaro drove the car for the first time, he found some of his father's personal effects in the glove compartment: mints, a hand-annotated road map, and a fuel receipt from their trip there. They were small relics of a journey that had begun as a respite and had become the defining mystery of their lives. The years following Regina and Mauro's disappearance were marked by a cruel alternation between renewed hope and profound disillusionment. Larissa and Icaro built a routine that included regular visits to Caldas Novas, always on September 17th, as a way to keep their parents' memory alive and to hold on to the possibility that a definitive clue might one day surface. In 2000, the first year after the disappearance, the resort's water park underwent a significant renovation. Part of the hydraulic system was modernized and several technical areas were reorganized to improve operational efficiency. During this work, the small room where Mauro's glasses had been found was formally decommissioned, removed from the normal flow of maintenance and inspection. The metal locker remained inside, pressed against the same wall, but now in an area rarely visited by staff. These structural changes created an environment where minor leaks and humidity problems could develop undetected. In the decommissioned room, a few old bottles of chemicals forgotten during the cleanout began to leak slowly. One contained a test dye used for verifying filtration systems, a reddish-brown liquid that, upon contact with the constant moisture, started to stain the floor and nearby metal surfaces. In 2002, Larissa and Icaro received a call that rekindled all their hopes. It was a collect call from a payphone somewhere in the interior of Goiás. A muffled female voice said only, "Lar," before the line went dead. The voice was indistinct, but it bore a resemblance to the way Regina pronounced her daughter's name. The police tried to trace the call's origin, but the telephone systems of the era did not allow for precise location tracking. The mysterious call led to weeks of renewed investigation. Larissa and Icaro traveled to dozens of small towns, showing photos of their parents and asking if anyone had seen them. They visited hospitals, police stations, and even isolated rural communities, always hoping to find a lead. However, no concrete evidence emerged. Gradually, they came to accept that the call might have been a cruel prank or a coincidence involving someone with a mental health issue. During this time, the decommissioned room at the resort continued its slow process of deterioration. The dye that had leaked from the old bottles reacted with the rust beginning to form on the metal locker, a result of the constant humidity. The chemical combination created an even more intense pigment, which spread through condensation and dripping, staining nearby surfaces and creating runoff patterns that deepened over time. By 2003 and 2004, Larissa and Icaro's annual visits to Caldas Novas had taken on a more ritualistic character. They would arrive on the afternoon of the 16th, stay in a simple hotel, and spend the 17th retracing their parents' last known steps. They visited the water park, spoke with longtime employees who still worked at the resort, and took a silent walk along the shore of Lake Corumba. Larissa graduated with a degree in education in 2003 and began working at a municipal school in Goiânia. Icaro completed his training as an electrician and found a steady job with an industrial maintenance company. They both built functional lives, but they always carried the weight of the unsolved mystery. At family gatherings, cousins' weddings, and holiday celebrations, the absence of Regina and Mauro was always palpable. The local press occasionally revisited the case, especially on the anniversary of the disappearance. Journalists would write retrospective articles, interview Larissa and Icaro, and speculate on new theories. But as the years passed, public interest waned and the case was gradually relegated to the region's archives of unsolved mysteries. Throughout this period, Inside the decommissioned room, the chemical processes continued. The slow leak from the old bottles had created a complex reaction between different substances. Dyes, solvents, and cleaning products stored there years before. The constant humidity facilitated these reactions, and gradually, visible runoff began to seep through the crevices of the metal locker. In 2005, 6 years after the disappearance, Larissa married a fellow teacher and Icaro started a serious relationship with a co-worker. Life moved forward, but they both held to their commitment to never completely abandon the search for their parents. The annual visit to Caldas Novas continued, now including their new partners, who slowly came to understand the importance of that family ritual. The locker in the decommissioned room had become, unbeknownst to anyone, a silent record of the passage of time. The chemical reactions occurring inside created a unique environment where pigments and moisture interacted in complex ways. The seepage through the cracks became more evident, though no one entered the space regularly to observe the slow changes taking place. The autumn of 2006 brought significant changes to the Caldas Novas resort. The administration decided to completely modernize the water park's filtration system, replacing old equipment with more efficient and ecological technology. The project included a reorganization of the technical areas to optimize maintenance and reduce operational costs. A specialized firm from Goiânia was hired for the job, sending an experienced technical team. Pedro Nogueira, the 48-year-old engineer in charge of the project, arrived at the resort on a rainy Monday in November. Accompanied by Sueli Andrade, a technician specializing in water filtration and treatment systems, he began a detailed survey of all the facilities that would be affected by the modernization. It was meticulous work, requiring a centimeter-by-centimeter inspection of each technical area. For the first few days, the team walked the main corridors, photographed equipment, and made notes on the condition of the installations. Pedro had a habit of documenting everything minutely, every pipe, every valve, every space that could impact the project. Sueli, meanwhile, focused on the chemical and environmental aspects, checking for residual old products and assessing ventilation conditions. On Thursday, November 16th, they reached the more remote parts of the technical system, including spaces that had been decommissioned during previous renovations. Pedro consulted the building plans provided by the resort's administration, but noticed that some rooms were not represented on the updated drawings. This was common in older buildings where modifications were not always properly documented. It was by following a return pipe that they found the small room that had been removed from the official map. Pedro pushed the door, which opened with a groan from hinges rusted by humidity. The room was dark, lit only by the faint light filtering through ventilation grates and the flashlight he always carried. Sueli entered behind him and immediately noticed a residual chemical smell. Not dangerous, but indicative of past storage. There were empty plastic drums, metal shelves, and at the back of the room, pressed against the wall, a large two-door locker that had clearly seen better days. Its grayish-blue paint was peeling, and there were obvious signs of corrosion across its structure. It was Pedro who first noticed the anomaly. His flashlight beam swept across the floor near the locker, revealing a puddle of reddish liquid that spread out a few feet from its metal base. The liquid had created dark trails that followed the irregularities of the concrete floor, as if it had been seeping from inside the locker for a very long time. "Sueli, come look at this," Pedro called, aiming the light at the locker doors. It was clear now that the brownish-red liquid was oozing from the seam between the two metal doors, running down to the floor to form the puddle they had seen. The quantity wasn't large, but it was fresh, as if it were part of an ongoing process. Sueli moved closer and examined the liquid, It had the consistency and color of certain chemicals used in pool treatment but mixed with something else. Rust, perhaps, or other compounds that had reacted over time. It didn't seem hazardous to the touch, but it was certainly not normal to find this kind of seepage in a decommissioned area. Then Pedro noticed another disturbing detail. In the crack between the two locker doors near the handle, something yellow was caught. Bringing the flashlight closer, he could see it was a thread of fabric, likely knit or wool, wedged between the metal plates. The fabric was stained by the reddish liquid, but its original yellow color was still visible. "This isn't right," Sueli said, gesturing toward the scene. "Look on the floor." Pedro directed his flashlight where she was pointing and saw a pair of glasses lying on the ground, a short distance from the locker. They had thin frames and one of the lenses was cracked, as if they had been left there a long time ago. Their position seemed casual, as if someone had taken them off for a moment and forgotten to pick them up. The combination of elements, the seeping liquid, the fabric caught in the doors, the glasses on the floor, created a picture that made no sense for a simple, abandoned storage room. Pedro had worked on dozens of similar renovations and had never encountered a situation like this. Something was deeply wrong, and his professional experience told him not to touch anything until they understood more. "Let's get out of here and call someone," Pedro decided. "This doesn't look like a standard chemical leak." They left the room, closed the door, and Pedro marked the entrance with a roll of caution tape he always carried. Then they went straight to the resort's administration to report their discovery. The current manager, who had only taken the position 2 years prior, had no detailed knowledge of the small room or its history. He consulted the available files and found references to the space as a former chemical storage room, decommissioned during a reorganization in the year 2000. There were no records of regular inspections, nor any mention of previous problems related to that environment. Faced with the unusual nature of the discovery, the manager decided to immediately contact the resort's specialized maintenance team and, subsequently, the local authorities. There was something clearly anomalous about the room, and the presence of the glasses suggested that people had been in that location at some point. Prudence demanded treating the situation as a potential matter for a fonte and criminal investigation. Pedro and Sueli remained on hand to provide a full account of what they had found and under what conditions. Both were experienced professionals and understood that unusual discoveries in sealed-off locations could have serious implications. While they awaited the arrival of the authorities, they completely sealed off the area and photographed everything before anything could be moved or altered. The late afternoon of November 16, 2006, marked the end of a 7-year mystery surrounding the fate of Regina and Mauro. The discovery in the decommissioned room was about to reveal what had truly happened on that rainy September night in 1999. When 2 guests from Goiânia followed a suggested shortcut and vanished without a trace. The civil police arrived at the disused room in the late afternoon. The lead investigator, different from the one who had conducted the original search in 1999, brought a full forensic team. Their first order of business was to meticulously photograph the scene exactly as Pedro and Sueli had found it. A cabinet with red streaks running down its doors, a piece of yellow fabric caught between them, and the eyeglasses lying on the floor. The criminalist immediately recognized the resemblance between the glasses and the description in the missing persons report for Regina and Mauro. The case files were consulted and photos of Mauro's glasses provided by his family back in 1999 showed an exact match to those found in the room. It was the first concrete piece of evidence linking the discovery to the couple who had disappeared 7 years earlier. The cabinet was opened with extreme care. The experts used a chisel to force the jammed doors while photographers documented every stage of the process. When the metal doors finally swung open, the interior revealed a scene none of the professionals present had expected to find. A human skeleton was inside, in a seated position at the back of the cabinet, its knees slightly bent and its spine curved by the confined space. Fragments of yellow fabric, clinging to the ribcage, confirmed that this was the source of the thread caught in the doors. Near the right femur, a dried-out shoulder bag contained objects that immediately pointed to the victim's identity. An intact roll of photographic film inside its protective plastic canister, and a set of keys with a small metal keychain. They were exactly as described by the couple's children in 1999. A meter from the cabinet, on the floor of the room, the forensic team found a second skeleton lying on its side, with fragments of black fabric dotted with small gold points still adhering to the bones. The arrangement of the remains, the absence of any signs of external violence, and the sealed environment led the experts to a single grim conclusion: accidental imprisonment, followed by death from exhaustion and dehydration. A detailed examination of the scene revealed the probable sequence of events. Mauro had become trapped inside the cabinet when the doors swung shut and accidentally locked, catching a thread from his sweater. Regina, on the outside, had tried desperately to free her husband. Pry marks on the metal doors confirmed her frantic efforts. At some point, her strength gave out, and she collapsed onto the floor of the room, where she remained until her death. The roll of film was sent to a specialized lab for development. Of the 36 available frames, only 2 had been exposed on that fatal night. The first showed the blurred lights of the water park's slides, a shaky image Mauro had tried to capture from outside. The second, more disturbing, showed part of a sign, its text cut off by the frame. Technical area, no entry. It was the last photo taken before the tragedy. In Mauro's small notebook, the pages had yellowed with moisture, but a few words were still legible. At the bottom of the last used page, a time was written. It was a precise record of the moment the situation had turned desperate, a timestamp that corresponded exactly to the investigators' estimated time of death. DNA analysis officially confirmed the identities. Regina Assis and Mauro Figueiredo had died in the early morning of September 18, 1999, trapped in a technical room due to a series of catastrophic safety failures. An improperly suggested shortcut, an unmarked blockage on a stairway, a defective door, and a cabinet with a faulty locking mechanism. The investigation determined the resort was civilly liable for negligence. The room was off the updated maps and was not subject to regular inspections. Employees were directing guests toward areas that were not safe. The subsequent lawsuit resulted in a significant settlement for their children, Larissa and Icaro, though no amount of money could compensate for 7 years of uncertainty and suffering. Corrective measures were taken immediately. The small room was renovated and incorporated into the regular inspection system. All technical access points received new security locks and standardized warning signs. Employee training was modified to strictly prohibit directing guests to restricted areas, regardless of the circumstances. For Larissa and Icaro, the discovery brought the painful relief of certainty. There were no public ceremonies or special tributes, only the necessary procedures and the quiet farewell the family chose to keep private. The water park continued to operate, and families continued to have fun on the same slides Mauro had wanted to photograph. Life went on. The small room where it all happened received a new padlock and a quarterly inspection. At night, when the blue lights of the water slides switch on, one can almost imagine the silence within those few inches between 2 sheets of metal. A space where time, heat, and desperation converged on a September dawn, seeping through the cracks for 7 long years. until someone finally decided to follow that red trail no one had noticed before. This true story from Caldas Novas is a chilling reminder of how simple oversights can lead to unimaginable tragedy. One of many Brazilian mysteries that have left an indelible mark on the families involved.